The Airbus is widely considered to be Europe's most successful cross-border industrial partnership and a model of state-sponsored industrial planning. Evolving from an effort in the late 60s to rescue the ailing French and British aeronautical industries, the Airbus managed to capture in 1993 26% of the world's aircraft market, and now constitutes a serious challenge to the near-monopoly position of the American market. Airbus has gained at the expense of Lockheed and McDonnell Douglas, and is making inroads in the domain of market leader Boeing. Michel Deschelot, Director of International Relations of Airbus.
Airbus is a consortium of 4 members of 4 major aerospace companies in Europe: Aerospatiale of France, Deutsche Airbus of Germany, British Aerospace in the UK, and CASA in Spain. It was set up in 1970 and has now reached an adulthood age.
The cockpit comes from French Aerospatiale, the fuselage from Deutsche Aerospace, the wings from British Aerospace, and the tail from CASA. The parts are flown to Toulouse in huge cargo planes, where the final assembly takes place in an Aerospatiale plant. Most Airbus planes are equipped with American engines, Pratt & Whitney or General Electric, and depending on the model, a total of 20 to 40% of the value of the parts comes from American suppliers.
If you look at all the aerospace projects before Airbus in Europe, not a single project reached a number of production which meant profits. And the only way to come to profits and to produce in large numbers the aircraft was to share the work amongst different countries in order to rely on the expectation that there would be more sales generated at least in these 4 countries and in world more generally because of the better pricing which can be achieved.
The headquarters is, in fact, scarcely more than an administrative office. Airbus, indeed, has been called a marketing organization that sells planes and hands the money over to its partners. The partners control its finances and also, through the pricing of its supplies, the profit margins. Due to its legal structure, Airbus itself does not publish public financial records or a balance sheet. This makes the financing of Airbus slightly obscure. In February 1993, President Clinton paid a visit to Boeing.
A lot of these layoffs would not have been announced had it not been for the $26 billion that the United States sat by and let Europe plow into Airbus over the last several years.
Stuart Eisenstadt, U.S. representative to the European Union.
The concern we have is that the Airbus airplanes are made with a very, very high subsidy from the European community that subsidizes the development costs by very low interest loans that only have to be repaid when a certain number of aircraft are sold, and if they're not sold, there's no loan repayment that has to be made at all. And that has a distorting effect on competition. So our companies are, in effect, not being subsidized. Airbus is being subsidized, and it provides an unfair advantage to them.
What does former European Community Commissioner Frans Andriessen think of the Americans' criticism?
Nee, er is geen cent Europees subsidie voor.
No, there has not been 1 cent in European subsidies for the airline industry, but rather national subsidies that are restricted to the development costs of new models. These carry with them agreements that as soon as the airplanes can be sold, the money will be paid back, totally or in part.
Over time, the percentage of support has been decreasing regularly from about 100% of the total development costs in relation to the initial A300 and A310 programs to roughly 60% for the A330, A340 programs, and down to 0 even for one of our latest derivative aircraft, namely the A321, for which there was not a single French franc, Deutsche Mark, pound sterling or pesetas involved from their national treasuries.
Die subsidies waren redelijk transparant.
The subsidies were relatively transparent, as these were decisions made by member states and were documented in budgets, etc. That was just the problem. We contend that the American firms received the same kind of subsidies, but in an indirect manner. And you couldn't see it, as it was hidden in development costs of military aircraft or space technology and so on. Of course, these had considerable effect on the civil sector.
Uitstraling was ook naar de civiele sector.
According to the Americans, the Airbus subsidies amounted to some $26 billion. On their side, the Europeans estimated that American government support reached between $20 and $40 billion.
When the U.S. government decides that it needs a military contract, it becomes a direct purchaser, not a subsidizer. It's deciding, for example, if the Air Force needs a particular plane, an F-16, a cargo plane, or whatever. That's a direct purchase. Now, certainly there are some instances in which that contract may provide certain benefits that flow back into civilian aircraft.
Was it the give and take during the negotiations that eventually led to an agreement?
We tried that, but finally aimed more for what we would find acceptable, and that was approximately 33 to 34% that the government would be able to contribute to the development of new aircraft. And the Americans decided to make what they were doing more transparent. In this way we could, in a manner of speaking, keep track of each other.
Airbus has now been operating relatively successfully for 25 years. Looking back, do you think the government's made a good decision in subsidizing the cooperation?
Ik denk het wel.
I think so, that you have to say that without the subsidy, the start, in any case, would have been much more difficult, if not unthinkable. The subsidies have, in that respect, played a big role.
Therefore, it's a strategically important industry, high-pay, high-skilled jobs with many technological spin-offs. And third, it's a growth area worth investing in.
Competition caused lower prices for the buyers, the airline companies. As a result, passengers pay less for their tickets.